Welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us again. It's great for you to take the time out of your busy schedules to join us for these webinars. We really appreciate that. Like always, for those who regularly attend, if you've got any questions, please put them up in the chat box. We'll get to them through the course of the session, or we'll deal with them at the end, depending on how we're tracking. I won't offer the put the hand up, and the reason for that is our normal marketing lady who's in charge of everything.
Yes.
She's off on her honeymoon, and I don't know how to look for a hand being raised. So just focus on the chat box, and then we can work it out from there. So again, welcome. Really look forward to spending the next sort of 40 odd minutes going through some bits and pieces. I'll hand over to Phil to take his usual spot as the interrogator.
Thanks a lot, Ashley, and welcome everybody. Geez, Ash, it must have been a busy month, mate, because it feels like I just did one of these a few days ago, and here we are again already. Now, over the last few months, we've spoken a lot about the actions of creditors, and in particular, the actions and activities of the ATO. Today, we're going to pause for a little bit, and we're going to look at some real-life case studies of actual Jonge Read clients and discuss how we've assisted some of our clients to deal with these pressures and issues that they're facing.
Yep.
Now, before we get into that, though, Ashley, what news or updates do you have for us that might be interesting?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things I wanted to quickly touch on, Phil, is actually around the MyGov. So for most of the accountants listening in, they would know about the MyGov system that's now really well and truly come into play. And and to be honest with you, I don't know how long it's been around from the accounting perspective, but what we have found in the last month is that the ATO, when they're issuing director penalty notices particularly, or any notices in fact, but the ones that we're interested in obviously is director penalty notices, is that they will put up a notification on the advisor's MyGov account saying that there's been new notifications go to a client. What's been really interesting about that is that they're actually putting them up on the portal 2 or 3 days before the letter date.
Wow.
Now, we talk a lot, and we'll talk some more today about this 21 days, which is such a critical date for DPNs. And the 21 days is from the date of the letter. Now, I had one client last week who they sent me the DPN on the Monday, but the date of the letter was actually not till the Wednesday. Now, it may not seem like a lot, but 3 days in a restructure scenario or to try and save a business is really quite significant. So it's something for those accountants. The accountant that I spoke to in this case, they had a system that every Monday morning they go through and have a look at all the notifications for a client that's come through in the last week, and found this DPN in there. That then allowed us to organise a meeting within 24 hours, and we actually had a plan before the DPN had even started.
Wow.
If we're waiting for the letters to come through, we may not have got it until maybe today, with the great pleasure of how Australia Post works. So something to be really aware of for those advisors that have systems in place. And really, let's be frank, Phil, for the last 2.5 years, no one's seen a DPN.
Yeah.
So reminding everyone of the importance that if they do come through, to jump on that sooner rather than later.
I just think that's a great tip, Ashley. And I'll say that when our team processed that, it actually confused people because it said, this must be wrong. It says the date of the DPN's in 2 days' time.
Yeah, we're certainly a bit worried that we'd misunderstood something and had to check the laws. The other things we're seeing a little bit of is that DPN pressure is really rising. We're seeing a lot more of that all over town. The DPNs, we're now seeing them on GST. Interestingly, it seems to be on more around people who are being overly delinquent. So they're normally just doing PAYG, but if the client is particularly delinquent, then it's significantly higher than that. I just got another one through this morning that's picked up 3/4 of GST, just to add it into the PAYG and the Super DPN.
Okay.
But they will come through as separate letters. The other big thing that everyone would see in the papers almost daily now is another construction company going down. Look, that's not news. There's nothing new about that. But what I guess the concern and what we're starting to see is the flow-on effect to the subcontractors now. So the big guys, everyone's known the building industry has been under a lot of pressure. But what's happening is they're all doing everything they can to either try and finish a job or not do a job, which then leaves subcontractors potentially out in the cold. Because they're getting their last payment and then putting it into liquidation or VA and leaving people at risk. So although the numbers are rising, it's the wave of where the real issue is with construction, I think, is still to come. And the final thing that I wanted to just talk about a little bit is actually the ATO rejecting new payment plans. There are a lot of people who set up payment plans to get through COVID and to get through this period. And they were really, really generous payment plans, really low, knowing that they had to come back and do another one. And a lot of those are starting to come up and the rejection letters are starting to come through now. So just something, again, to be mindful of people where you've set something up early.
All right, Ashley, thanks for that. Now, over the last little while, we've spoken about director penalty notices or DPNs. We've spoken about them a lot. They are coming out. And at least for our guests today, we believe that some of the clients of the guests at our webinar today, they're going to get these DPNs. Of course, it goes without saying that if someone gets a DPN, they should talk to your good self or one of our team here at Jonge Read and get some obligation-free advice. Just really quickly, mate, could you run me through the process of what that looks like if someone gets a DPN and you ring Jonge Read? Yeah,
so look, in really simple terms, it's a referrer, someone who refers a job to us can have as much or a little involvement as they want. Like if they get on the phone, they can say, look, the client's just received one of these. I've told them you're going to give them a call. You can organise a meeting and we'll come to their offices or do it online if it's remote. So we can set up a meeting to go through it, or just give us a call and say, what's the impact of this? What are the options? You can have a chat to your client and then work out where to go from there. One of the big things is that we really like to have an opportunity to talk to the client about what their needs are, what their goals are moving forward, so that we can then say, look, there are things that can be done or things that can't. Once we have an idea of what their requirements are, what the time pressures are, we can then put together a strategy plan at no cost to the client. That can be turned around in 24 hours because of the limits, or 48 hours with the timing issues that we've got. Some of my strategists might be having a coronary, just me saying that out loud, but we'll come up with a plan for them that's not a cookie cutter. It's an actual, a plan for them that will suit them.
And as you say, Ashley, it's just so important to understand what the client's goals are because they are all different. What are some of the common goals that you hear from clients when you first meet with them?
Look, it sort of pretty much falls into two categories in terms of, they've had enough of the business. This is the last straw, they want to get out, whether that be controlled or just run away. And then the other is that obviously they have a belief in the industry, they have a belief in their business, but they need to find a way of getting through the hurdle. So they're probably the two ways that most people go. The other big thing that we always hear is that now they're worried about their personal assets.
DPN will do that to you.
Yeah, so now with the risk of the personal, it's, am I going to lose my house? Can the ATO take my house? Those type of questions is what really comes to fore at the moment. They're the big ones that are hitting us early.
So some people might want to keep going. Some people might want to restructure and continue in the industry and give it another go. So, all right, Ash, once you understand what the client wants, what's some of the next initial steps that you would take?
Well, whether we're talking about an actual DPN or whether there's the risk of a DPN, because it's actually really easy to tell what's actually going to happen to you DPN-wise, so you can get that information off the integrated client account. But it's actually working out, the key is to work out how much is lockdown and how much is non-lockdown. So if you need to do something more structured with a liquidation or restructure, how much of the debt will be remitted by the restructure.
Now, we've done this a heap of times, but for our new members of our audience today, and it's great to have new people joining all the time, I've got to say, it's fantastic. The more, the merrier. But just for our new people, could you give us a quick rundown on the difference, or what is a lockdown, what is a non-lockdown?
Yeah, so in really simple terms, GST, PAYG, wet tax and luxury car tax, if you lodge the BAS associated with that quarter within 3 months of its due date, then it will be a non-lockdown DPN for that period. If you lodge it outside that 3 months, it will be automatically locked down.
Right.
Yeah, that also applies if you change it. So if you make an adjustment to your DPN, to your BAS, then you're creating a lockdown component for that bid straight away. The other part of the DPN is superannuation. Superannuation, you don't get anywhere near as much grace period. If you don't pay the superannuation that on the day it's due, you need to lodge the superannuation guarantee forms on the same day. Right. Otherwise, it's locked down straight away.
Okay. So the director only has 21 days, as we said before, 21 days from the date of the director's penalty notice to achieve a remission, or in other words, get out of the personal liability for that tax debt.
Yeah.
So 21 days, that's not a lot of time. And you can only achieve remission by putting the company into liquidation, voluntary administration, or appointing a small business restructuring practitioner to put forward a proposal to creditors. Is that right, Ash?
Apart from paying it, Phil.
Apart from paying it.
So if it's paid, you get remission, but otherwise, then you need to use one of those methods to deal with it. Payment plan, you can enter into a payment plan, but you won't actually achieve remission by entering into the payment plan.
Okay.
It will still lock down at the end of the 21 days.
Yeah.
But if you make the payments over time and meet the payment requirements, then obviously that debt goes away. But if there is a non-lockdown component that you enter into a payment plan for, that will become a lockdown regardless of the payment plan. It doesn't go away on that basis.
Okay, so that's pretty important. So the split between the lockdown component and the non-lockdown component is really important.
Yes.
In the real world, Ash, what are we talking about here? Why is it so important? What does it all mean?
Well, I mean, in simple terms, it comes down to what the exposure to the director is personally. So if you have a really large non-lockdown component, then using the options available to you of liquidations, VAs, small business restructures is a really motivating factor. So you can actually get out of that remission and not become a lockdown and protect personal assets. If it's a small amount of non-lockdown, so if the lockdown component if the lockdown component is really high and it's already a personal liability, then the timing pressure is not there.
Yep.
And really your focus is on personal asset protection, not so much the company. Okay. Now you still need to deal with the company, because let's always remember that 90% of the DPNs are PAYG.
Yeah.
So there's another chunk in an integrated client account that sits on top of that, being the rest of the GST debt. And if you can't pay the PAYG, there's a fair chance you can't pay the GST part of it as well.
Okay.
So that how much is already a personal liability as compared to what will become a personal liability is really critical in the timing and what your options are available to you.
All right. So the split between lockdown and non-lockdown is important. The amount of time you have left to achieve remission, if that's the goal, is also critical.
Yeah.
What other sorts of things do you look at early on? What else is important?
Well, there's hundreds of them, to be honest, but I guess the key ones that would be whether they've got an all-PAP on there, whether a bank or another security or another lender of some kind has got security on the company.
Yep.
As it changes what your options are. An all-PAP will prevent the ability for you to enter into a sale without their approval or consent. You've got always got a lot of PIMSI charges now, which is the purchase money security interests, which is generally will come from two areas. One will be related to equipment finance or equipment or motor vehicle finance, or it's suppliers and creditors. So if you wanted to, if you've got a client that's got $2 million in stock in their warehouse, we can't move that stock without getting everyone's approval because they've got charges in play. So we've got to work through all of those things, and just the type of security holders you've got and how they want to play.
And if you don't have a lot of time, I don't know if anyone here has tried to get an approval out of a bank in recent times, but if you've only got 3 days to get an approval and get it all sorted out, I wish you all the best of luck, because it's hard to get a decision out of a bank in that sort of turnaround time these days.
It certainly can be, yeah.
Right, now, thanks, Ash. Now, what we're going to do now is maybe move on and talk about a few mini case studies, a few real-life Jonge Read clients, and we're not going to mention any names, obviously.
No.
And these, for us, these are new files, and these are very much work in progress matters. So let's start with one where there was a large lockdown component. So it's already a personal debt. There's nothing I can do about it. Have you seen one like that lately, Ash?
Yeah, I see no doubt with that. For this client, they had a 350,000 lockdown director penalty notice, and the non-lockdown component was only 24,000.
Right.
So very significant. Was already a liability, already an interest, but the client did want to continue in the business, but the total tax debt, including the DPN, was just too insurmountable for him to. There was no way he was going to be able to pay it off.
So there's not much point busting, world speed records to try to achieve remission of a $24,000 penalty. If you can't pay the $350,000 penalty, it doesn't really matter.
No.
So in that case, Ash, it's all. What did we recommend the client do?
Yeah, so because the client wanted to pay the tax debt and he believed potentially he could in time, what we were able to do is that we basically said to the client, don't worry about the DPN, let it lock down. So 350 became 374. In the scheme of it, it's not a whole lot of...
In for a penny, in for a pound, as they used to.
And then we were recommending that we were going to go through a full restructure of the business to give him a chance to get the business back on its feet, and hopefully have the funds then to pay the debt at a personal level. One of the interesting things about paying it at a personal level is that, particularly with PAYG, they can't issue a DPN on the interest, Phil.
Yeah, okay.
So you actually limit the exposure and the cost to the individual more than if you tried to pay it in the company.
All right.
When it's a bit behind. So it's a really handy thing to do. We're focusing now on getting finance in place to move the assets across to the new entity.
Yep.
Full restructure happening, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of debtors to collect.
Yep.
So we're going to collect those and then deal with all of that. But we're also starting to implement a personal protection plan in case he doesn't get the money that he thinks he will.
Good plan, Ashley.
Not too bad, mate. Approved by you.
So what's the state of play with this client right now, Ash?
So we've got all the valuations done. So the goodwill, the plant and equipment valuations are done. We've been able to raise some finance against the family home to help us pay out the secured creditors. The sale agreement's been prepared, and the business is being sold to a new entity for the full fair consideration.
Good.
The new business has started to trade already, and it's making its payments under the vendor finance arrangement that's been set up as part of the sale agreement. The existing company is still in the process of collecting its debtors and paying those out in accordance with their security and priority positions and using the vendor finance money for the same purposes.
Okay.
What we've been able to do is continue to make payments against the ATO via the vendor finance, by the vendor finance and by the and by the collection of debtors and things like that. So we've still got an arrangement with the ATO which is obviously stopping them taking action against the director personally just yet.
So the client can still choose to pay the ATO if they want to, right?
Yep.
There's no drama with that.
Yeah.
But in this case, if something goes wrong and through no fault of their own, the director finds error on it, the company's unable to make those payments, the business is already trading in a new name, and that director still has a way to make a living.
Yeah, and the company can just be shut down or liquidated at a time in the future that we need
if it needs to be. So what about on the personal side, Ashley? You mentioned that, personal asset protection strategies. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we're in our clients are married and they've got a house in joint names. Mm-hmm. So we're setting up an equity purchase for the wife to buy the remaining equity in the home off the husband.
Yeah.
That needs valuations from on the house, evidence of the secured debt to determine its position at the time. We enter into a deed of equity where they buy the wife will buy the remaining equity, and she will make the payments on that equity deed. Mm-hmm. And then obviously he will receive that money from her until that's paid out.
Because if something goes wrong and he faces personal liability, in a worst case scenario, if that gentleman ends up in bankruptcy, well, he doesn't own the equity in the home. It's owned by his wife. So that's good. Well, thanks, Ash. Now, if you had more time, you just would have done a normal restructure and you still could have achieved remission if you had the company in liquidation or whatever within 21 days of the date of any DPN. Now, I'm sure that our regular members of our audience and our faithful followers, who we really appreciate, have probably heard this before. So I'm glad the cameras are all turned off so I can't see people rolling their eyes at me. But for the new members in our audience today, I'm just going to very quickly run through a few things again. When we talk about doing restructures, you need to get a valuation of the physical assets and the goodwill of the business. That's even if the director, your client, is absolutely certain that the business has no goodwill value. Not going to argue with me. Just get me a valuation that says that and I'm happy.
Yep.
You need to deal with any security interests that may be registered over the business or its assets. You need to set up a new trading entity and re-employ the required staff in the name of that entity. That means you need to take over their entitlements. But if the new entity does take over their entitlements, they're entitled to offset that amount against the purchase price of the business. Then it's about preparing a sales contract, executing that, and then the new trading entity paying for the business either in a lump sum or on vendor finance terms. The vendor company, the original company, it then needs to distribute that money according to priority and security positions. So thank you for putting up with me, our regular crowd, letting me do that again.
Look, I think it's really important that people understand that there is a right way to do it and a legal way to do it. And that's something that we're very proud of that we do compared to some of the other things that you can't see out there. If you're going to bring a client to us and we're going to do some of these things that we do, you got to have that confidence that it's being done the right way.
And you've got this cranky old compliance manager that doesn't like doing things the naughty way.
Is a good pain in the ass, I guess is the word I should use.
Let's talk about something a bit different though, mate.
Yep.
Now, I think you had a client recently that had a large non-lockdown component of their director's penalty notice.
Yep.
And they took, they were very on top of things and they left it until 3 days before that penalty was due to lockdown before they met with you. Is that right?
Yes, they did leave it a little bit late.
3 days. So nothing like leaving it at the last minute, Ash, eh?
No, it was a bit tricky. Yep.
All right. What was the story with that client?
Again, they had a deep, as you said, a DPN that had 870,000 non-lockdown component.
Right.
And as you mentioned, it had, and the lockdown component was a whole $3,000.
3,000. A good bookkeeper or good accountant, hey, getting those forms.
Yeah, so they'd certainly been lodging everything on time and doing it all the right way. But as you said, we only had 3 days left until the notice expired. The client also had a secured creditor with an all-pap over the company that needed to be dealt with. And of course, with 3 days, you don't have time to pull off that type of miracle with getting secured creditors to make changes necessary to agree with a restructure.
Yeah.
To be honest, 3 days for a restructure is a little bit tricky.
tricky. Great understatement, Mr. Shield.
Yeah.
So Ash, look, you said that this client wanted to pursue their interest in the business, but no chance, eh? 3 days, too late, nothing you can do.
Oh, well, it wouldn't be a case study if the answer was we could do nothing, would it?
It'd be a short case study, wouldn't it? It'd be brief.
Yeah. So no, look, in this case, what we were able to do is we recommended that the client enter into a management agreement. So the management agreement with a brand new entity that basically said, we'll take over the running of the affairs of the business, we'll take over the staff, we'll run the work through and do all of the work on behalf of the business that had the DPN. So we get the new entity up, we got it running through there in that period,
right?
So that we had continuity of the operations of the business.
It's just critical, isn't it?
Without that, you're in all sorts.
Yeah.
And then that allowed us to put the existing company into liquidation inside that 72-hour period that we had to play with. That gave us remission of the 870 DPN.
Right.
And so that allowed us to have that the director protected from that becoming a personal liability.
Yeah.
And now we can start working through the process of dealing with the finance and dealing with all of that with a view of buying the business off the liquidator once we can get all of the things in place that we need to.
You know, I should have known that's like 3 days notice, staring down the barrel at 870,000, but there's still an option. There's still things that you can do, right? So, and no one better than you or our team here as strategists to help people with that.
Let's be really clear. It's not me. There is a very smart team of people that can put all this stuff together. It's not
all of our strategists.
I'm just the voice. I'm just the voice here.
Oh, well. Now, I know that that's a work in progress, but what's that looking like right now? How are things going?
Yeah, well, there's some ups and downs in the process. So the liquidator's happy to allow the management agreement to run. So he's letting the business continue to run through the management agreement while we do it. The existing bank wasn't real happy.
No.
So we're working through. They've got a mortgage over the director's home. So they're at least willing to sit there while we go through this process and work out how to get them paid out. Finance, obviously, when you've got so little time, getting new finance when there is a director of a company in liquidation does complicate getting new finance. But there are still plenty of options out there, and we've got a new lender in play at the moment, and we're just waiting for the loan docs to come through to start that process.
Not a major bank, eh?
It's second tier. They're still they're major, but not your top four.
Not your top four.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't need to go private finance.
No.
Which is why I wanted to make this.
There's that whole middle market, isn't there, between the big guys and the mezzanine type stuff.
That's it. There's some massive stuff there. Yeah. The other thing, we're sort of working through the goodwill valuation so that we've got something to put our hat on the offer. Dealing with moving across some of the other lenders. So there is some finance, equipment finance in play. So getting some of that assigned, some of that being we have to get new finance. And then we're hoping very soon to put the offer to the liquidator to buy the business off the liquidator, and which the management company is obviously going to make that offer.
Okay. So talk about snatching victory out of the jaws of defeat. 3 days away from a director's penalty locking down, and the client was able to achieve remission. They avoided bankruptcy, and while it'll cost them a little bit of money and probably a bit more than it could have, we still expect that they're going to have a business to run and a way to make a livelihood. So
absolutely,
outstanding, mate.
Yeah. And a whole bunch of staff have still got their jobs, and
a whole bunch of staff have got their jobs. Whole bunch of other businesses out there are still at least going to be able to trade with somebody. So a lot of, and there's a premises that's still going to get rented from a landlord. So there's lots of things that go into it. Any other recent examples of something that may be a little bit out of the ordinary, something a bit different?
Yeah, well, we mentioned it earlier. One of the issues that we're seeing now is people under payment plans. And I've got a client that had probably been speaking to for a little while, I guess. They were under a payment plan. everyone thought it was all okay.
Yep.
The payment plan came up for renewal, and but the ATO declined it because now it wasn't just paying something to keep it alive. It was, we want the rest of the debt paid in full. So the client believed that he has the ability to pay the debt in full, but he needs more time than what the ATO is wanting to set the structure on.
Okay.
So, and he's really, really focused on doing it. What happened was that he received a DPN, all of it non-lockdown.
All of it.
All of it. So for $1 million.
$1 million, not a just
Yeah,
a
not
small
my
sum,
biggest,
eh?
not my biggest one this month so far. I think for us, which I'm sure is not by far the biggest that's out there, but the biggest one was about 3.5, but
Yeah.
3.5 mil. But this one is significant at
It's a
1
lot of
mil.
money.
So the problem with this client is that a lot of its major contracts, and what gives it value and what gives it some hope, is that they've got a lot of contracts with major corporations.
Right.
And moving them is not something that you can do in 5 minutes. So if you've got smaller contracts with smaller firms, you can get on the phone and get something done quickly. Big boys, they have systems and procedures that take, a long time sometimes to actually get reassigned to new entities. It can be done, but it just doesn't
Takes time.
happen overnight. So yeah, so this one's a little bit more tricky.
It sounds very tricky, Ash. It's really hard to do a restructure, and really you're at the mercy of the ATO to an extent anyway, because we're talking about director penalty notices, but irrespective of what the director's liability is, the company still owes the money.
Yeah.
And the ATO can still chase them and shut them down if they really want to.
Yeah.
What can you do in a situation like this?
Yeah, well, because this client was really focused on pursuing the contracts and continuing the work, and that was where the real value was. What we looked at in this case is our recommendation was to look at a voluntary administration.
Right.
But to do that, before you go into voluntary administration, you don't want, as a general rule, an administrator running a business. It is and look, I've got a lot of administrators we use, and they can do a good job, but they're very, very expensive,
Sure.
because you've got such an overlay that has to sit over the top of it. So we're able to enter into a management agreement for a new trading entity to run the businesses. That was okay with the contracts, because a lot of these contracts are used to having subcontractor models in play.
Yep.
So there were clauses in the contract that allowed us to do that part. So once we bedded down the management agreement, and we're going to put the company into voluntary administration. The goal will be to present a full and final satisfaction of all the debts under a deed of company arrangement in due course through the deed.
This is one of my favourite parts. This is where I get to play dumb a little bit.
Yeah, good try.
Good try. So I'm going to play a bit dumb and say, but Ashley, like voluntary administration, that's an event of insolvency. The corporates, wouldn't they be able to cancel those contracts because it's an insolvent company?
And if you, in saying it that way, we know that you already know the answer. So no. So look, what it is in simple terms is that obviously that's not the case. Otherwise, we wouldn't look at that, and that's mainly because there has been changes in the law going back 4 years now, where they allowed contracts cannot be automatically terminated due to an act of insolvency.
Okay.
It came through under the ipso facto, it's what they call ipso facto clauses, and there were some protections put in place. Now, people can still cancel contracts, but they can't use insolvency as the means of doing that. And then obviously, as part of this process, we're working with the directors to make sure that all of those contract holders are comfortable with what's going on.
And the idea behind that was voluntary administration is supposed to give the company an opportunity to reach an agreement with its creditors. But the use of ipso facto clauses was effectively destroying the goodwill value of those businesses because it would lose all its contracts. So that's why they made the change.
Yeah.
But in this case, though, Ash, the biggest creditor is the ATO. They're owed a ton of money, so they'll just shoot the whole thing down. They've already rejected the payment plan. So how's this going to work?
Yeah, it's not quite as simple as that in a deed, Phil, with the voting way, the way it works. There's under a deed of company arrangement, there's actually two votes that occur. The first one is what they call on the voices.
Yep.
So the ATO, significant creditor, absolutely in this one, but they're one vote under the voices.
Okay.
So the first vote under a deed of company arrangement is on as I say, on the voices, and if there were, let's just say, for an example, there's 20 creditors in this, as long as 11 are excited about it and say yes to it, then it will get up and all creditors are caught by that.
Now, it could end there, couldn't it? Like if the voices say yes, that could be the end?
Yep, absolutely.
What often happens though?
I don't know if it's often, but what can happen is that where you've got a large single creditor that is a large, and even though so you could have 10 creditors at $100 each, and then you have one creditor, like in this case, at over $1 million. So 10 and 10 is not even a quarter of it. So they call what they call for a poll.
Okay.
And then it is then you have a second vote, which is a vote on the dollar value.
Right.
And the dollar value can obviously change the vote. And in some cases, you'll end up with a yes on the voices, but you'll have a no on the dollars.
So then I've got a tie. So
we're 1-1.
1-1
in the game.
How do I get out of that? What happens then if it is a tie?
So when you tied at 1-1, then you've got the next step of the process is that the voluntary administrator, as the chair, has a casting vote.
Okay.
So they have the final say if you've got this position. Now, when they write their report, they actually have an obligation to make a recommendation to the creditors, whether they support the deed of company arrangement or they don't. Right. And their job is to look at it on the basis of the majority of creditors and whether it is better than liquidation. So if the offer is better than liquidation, they will generally recommend that creditors take it. Mm-hmm. So they then have the casting vote, and on their recommendation, they'll generally follow. So if they've recommended the deed, then they will use their casting vote to vote it, and then we get a 2-1 split.
Yep.
And we get the docker up, and then it progresses from there.
All right. Now, I just also say that with that, effectively, you can bind the ATO to that agreement, whether they vote in favour of it or not.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And I'll also say that if you said that the voluntary administrator compares the return in liquidation to the offer that's made to creditors in full and final satisfaction of that debt, which is really important. Now, the alternative in liquidation, there's no protection from ipso facto clauses in liquidation. Those contracts could be gone.
Yes.
And it's only voluntary administration gives you that protection.
Well, to be clear, it's also the small business
debt restructure. Yes, quite right, actually. Thank you.
We can use that as well.
Now, I tried to trip you up there twice, and I struck out both times. I'm never going to win, am I?
So, I'll certainly try not to let you, particularly with your notes here.
Yeah. So where's that project up to now, Ashley? It's a fascinating job and really interesting strategy. What's going on with it now?
Yeah, so we're in administration. The administrator's been appointed. The director's received got a protection of the remission of the $1 million of the DPN. We're in the process of formulating the offer and making sure that the offer that we put up is better than the return in liquidation. Mm-hmm. Getting evaluations, evidence of the security positions, all the bits and pieces that come along with that. Assisting with the client in identifying supportive creditors, talking to some creditors to let them understand what the process is and why this is going to work.
Yep.
And the offer is going to be very, very significant. So it's really in the interest for everyone to play along. Mm. And then obviously the goal is to get the administrators' support to our offer and put that into the report. Mm-hmm. And then we'll go through the voting process.
So really with this client, he actually wants to pay the debt.
Yeah.
He just needs a process or a formal structure in which to do it now that his payment plan's been rejected. So
it's about doing a debt restructure that everyone's tied to.
Yeah. And importantly, people are tied to it, even if they don't vote at all. They're still bound by the outcome, even if they don't show up. Right?
Yep.
So winning 1-0 is fine. Winning 2-1 achieves the same outcome. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay. And they're all tied into it. Well, Ash, we've been going, can you believe we've been going 40 minutes already?
We do know how to talk, the two of us, don't we?
Time flies, buddy.
One thing I will say, just for a bit of clarity too, is that there's probably a misconception or a misunderstanding at the moment about the ATO's support for these things. Pre-pandemic, I would always be working on the basis that the ATO was generally always going to vote no.
That's the way I worked.
If we were lucky, they wouldn't vote at all.
Yeah.
But generally, they were a no vote. Since the pandemic, both in the small business restructures and the VAs that we're aware of, the support is considerably higher. As long as the return is better than liquidation, they're generally being a lot more supportive to businesses at the moment.
Yeah.
But in this guy's case, the payment plan that was going to work for him was outside the policy structure that they could work with.
Yep.
But putting it through another policy structure, being the insolvency framework, they're willing to accept effectively a different payment plan and make it work. So it's a changing market without a shadow of a doubt.
That's a great strategy that the team developed on that one. I think it was one of your team down there in Melbourne on that one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the team, one of the guys.
Yeah. Well, look, those are certainly some really interesting cases that our firm's working on at the moment through yourself and through the rest of our team. Before we wrap up for the day, do you have any final words for our audience today, Ash?
Look, I think the critical thing, and we spent a lot of time talking about DPNs and all that sort of stuff, and I think that they are going to be the target for at least the next 6 months. And for those who have been putting up with listening to me for a long time, I talked about that the ATO strategy is about forcing a director to make a decision. Not about actually chasing the companies and liquidating themselves. They want to keep themselves out of the court lists as much as they possibly can. So the problem with that strategy for us as advisors and for clients is that everything's based on a 21-day cycle. So it does leave limited time. So, if you've got a client with an exposure that hasn't been a DPN yet, and the client may well be fully intending on wanting to pay the whole lot, but as we saw here before, one of the strategies is let's move it out into move the business out to a safe place, structure the payments going back to the old entity, that if it falls apart, we still have a business. If it doesn't fall apart, everyone gets paid. Time is a critically valuable tool, and although we have options when we have no time or very little time, any more time we can get, the better off we are. So that's really the main sort of message I want to go to. Please make sure our entire team Australia-wide are more than happy to pick up the phone and talk about any scenario. Get to us early. We can talk about a client directly, and then we can get involved with the client as and when we need to.
Okay.
But if anything, just please reach out. Unfortunately, days mean a lot in these scenarios now.
Yeah, absolutely, and dealing with large sums of money in some cases too.
There's certainly some significant ones.
Now we should expect our little survey thing to pop up soon, shouldn't we?
It will be there. I think the one thing I do want to say, next month we're a little bit excited while everyone's doing the webinar. We spend a lot of time, you and I, talking about the ATO. And it's our version of what we think the ATO is going to do. This next month, we've been able to have the Assistant Commissioner of Taxation that specialises in the collection area, who is coming on to speak to us at next month's webinar. So please look out for the invites for that one. We're quite excited that you're not going to get our version of what the ATO is saying. We're going to ask the questions on what the ATO is up to. I know that they've got a number of different models and systems that they're putting in place to try and help people. And we're hoping to spend a lot of time exploring all of that in the next month's webinar. So
Fantastic.
rather than me being the pickle who gets questioned all the time, we're going to have someone else answering it. So please look out for the invites. They'll be out the usual couple of weeks' time for next month. You'll also find them on our websites. So please look out for it, and we look forward to having that chat where we can really delve into what's happening behind the wall of the ATO.
Great to have the ATO join us for one of our webinars, I've got to say.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
absolutely.